I'll just begin by thanking you for being here virtually. And for
Thanks
those
for inviting. Pleasure.
And for those of you who are not in the field of biogas, the European Biogas Association is the main sort of lobby or interest group for everything pertaining to biogas in the EU. And I'm really glad that you can let us know a little bit about the regulations and policies that are relevant in that area. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
So should I start now the presentation, right?
Yes, it's 1 o'clock. We can start.
Okay. It's just a second. Okay. It's a real pleasure being here during the 4th Coastal Biogas conference, and it's a pleasure and it's an honor. Thanks for inviting me and inviting the European Biogas Association. Thanks to the organizers, all the panelists and the participants who are joining today this very interesting conference and workshop. Also, thanks to all the panelists of the morning session who delivered, I think, very interesting remarks and insights from their experience. And what is clear and obvious is that at European level you have a lot of regulation, a lot of directive, but when you do this kind of business, when you work with waste, most of the time you have different regulation and different way the regulation has been implemented at national level, and we know that this is always a big obstacle for everyone, and also to understand exactly how an activity could be carried out legally and in line also with environmental concerns, because of course our aim is to deliver an important outcome for the environment, so recycling natural resources and generating renewable energy. Today I will therefore speak a bit about the biogas, the European Biogas Association. If I manage, yes, to go to the next slide. By starting by saying what is the vision of the association. We believe that biomethane and other renewable gases are an important cornerstone of a carbon neutral economy in Europe. By 2050, according to EBA, biomethane and other renewable gases should enable Europe to thrive on a fully renewable energy system, both on and off the grid. And we know that, yes, in Europe you have situation, for instance, in Finland, where and in Sweden also, where most of consumption of gas and renewable gas happens off the grid due to the situation of the geographic situation of the countries. We believe that biomethane and other renewable gases are important enabler of circular economy, and it will make optimal use of our resources through integrated sustainable food production, nutrient recycling and waste treatment solutions. But at the same time, it will also improve the security and the supply and the storage of the renewable energy. Therefore, the European Biogas Association advocates for the recognition of biomethane and all the other renewable gases as sustainable, as on-demand and flexible energy sources that provide multiple knock-on socioeconomic and environmental benefits. It's very important for us that the European Commission and the European Parliament and politicians in general at European level recognize that biomethane and other renewable gases have a very positive impact on our society, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a social and economic point of view, by creating local jobs and supporting the creation of a clean and circular economy. and therefore we strive to make anaerobic digestion an essential part of competitive and sustainable agriculture and waste management. We can count to the support of 39 national members who are in particular national organizations from 27 countries. Not all of them from the European Union, because we can count also on Norway and on the United Kingdom. But we also have private companies, universities, and other bodies who joined recently EBA as associated members. In this list, we can count 96 members, and it is updated to June 2020, but also thanks to the work of our executive director, Armen Decker, and Secretary General Susanna Pfluger, who joined the Coastal Biogas conference, the previous one. We managed to increase our members, and if I am correct, we should be around 100 at this time. So what is the situation of biogas in Europe? We see that at the beginning of the 2000, let's say the last 10 years, there was a sharp increase of the number of biogas plants in Europe, in particular driven by Germany, but also by Italy and the Nordic countries. And in the map, we included the number of plants per million of inhabitants. In the last 2 to 3 years, the increase slowed a bit due to different regulations that were approved also at national level, but nevertheless we think that also through the circular economy regulation and the new recycling targets and the obligation for member states to implement separate collection as of 2024, we will see a sharp increase again in the number, and also thanks to the renewable energy policies. But of course, biogas is important not only in its own value, but also because it's an enabler of the production of biomethane, which we see that is an important renewable transport fuel for the future, and to achieve the ambition of the European Commission in terms of climate, greenhouse gas emission, and climate neutrality. And we see also that the business sector, the companies trust this opportunity, and there was an interesting increase in the last years, especially in Germany, in France, in Italy, and in Denmark, and also in the Nordic countries, again, that confirm to really approve and believe in this technology and in the development. Of course, what is important also not only renewable energy, but also circular economy and recycling. And we already heard during this morning that an important output of the anaerobic digestion is the digestate that can work as a fertilizing product. Figures about digestate production in Europe are very different depending on from country to country, but also depending how authorities and operators decide to make use of the product. We know, for instance, that the fertilizing product regulation, of which I will talk shortly after this slide, was adopted only in 2019, and with the new regulation, it's possible to have harmonization of rules for organic fertilizers, so fertilizers that are manufactured on bio-based materials and not only on fossil-based materials. Before the approval of this regulation in Europe, every country had its own national rules, and therefore, in certain circumstances, digestate could become a fertilizing product, and in some other circumstances, certain barriers had to be overcome and certain requirements to be complied with. Therefore, in this table, I included some of numbers that I took from Eurostat, showing what is the generation of digestate from anaerobic digestion of municipal waste. So in this number, we have mainly waste that is collected from household. My point is to show that it's already an important source of fertilizing product, but in the next year it's very likely that this number will raise due also to the fertilizing product regulation. We see, for instance, that at European level there were in 2018 10 tons of digestate that were generated. But only 3.8 tons of million tons, sorry, of this digestate generated was further treated. Further treatment of digestate, it means that is still considered a waste. It means that the quality of the digestate requires that its status is still considered as a waste. And it can be, of course, either landfilled, disposed of, it can be incinerated, you can do energy recovery, or you can also do recycling of digestate, because according to the Waste Framework Directive, when you do land treatment of digestate resulting in benefit to agricultural ecological improvement, this is accounted for recycling. But at the same time, it means that you are not manufacturing a fertilizing product, but you are still using, as a matter of fact, waste digestate. Therefore, we see that out of this 3.8 million tons of waste digestate, 65% of them were disposed of, and only 35% were directly used as a soil improver or fertilizer for the purpose. But it means also that the 6.3 million tons, the 64%, are missing from this calculation, which means most likely that they end up in a fertilizing product according to national specification and national rules. But we know that nowadays in Europe there are also shipment of waste, which can happen intra-European Union or outside the European Union. And so it's possible also that some of the tons of waste digestate produced are shipped across Europe or outside. If you see, for instance, in Denmark, according to Eurostat in 2018, 7,000 tons of digestate were generated, but in Denmark 28,000 tons were treated. Therefore, it means that they imported 21,000 tons for treatment of digestate. So I mentioned in my previous during my previous slide the fertilizing products regulation that was adopted by the European Parliament and the European Council in 2019, but nevertheless the full implementation of the regulation will happen only as of 16 July in 2022. During this 3 years gap, let's say, the member states are struggling to implement certain provision and certain obligation of the regulation, because they have to establish certain bodies. So there are certain administrative and bureaucratic steps that for the establishment of these bodies that will basically authorize the manufacturing of a fertilizing product and the placing of the market of that product. To do so, member states need, first of all, to set up notification authorities they need to establish procedures for the notification authorities to appoint conformity assessment bodies who will basically verify that the manufacturing process complied with all the legal requirements. And so conformity. Thanks. I will wrap up. It's my last slide.
Okay.
So the conformity assessment body will simply authorize the manufacturing and the placing of the market of the product, which will happen in 2021. We know because EBA take part in the expert group meeting of the European Commission on the fertilizing product that some member states or many member states, due to the current situation, pandemic, experienced big delays, but they expect therefore they are a bit late, but they expect to respect the deadline. Another big point of discussion is the endpoint in the manufacturing chain for animal byproduct and derived product, for instance, manure. And we know that EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, should deliver a scientific opinion, including a risk assessment to the inclusion or the exclusion of this material in a fertilizing product, and it will be delivered by October 2021. So we are somehow very positive of this regulation. We believe that it will, the full implementation and the correct implementation will help to achieve the targets of the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, and in particular to have at least 25% of the European agricultural land dedicated to organic farming, and also to reducing by 50% the nutrient losses that we experience nowadays. So this was my conclusion, and I give back the word to you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we'll have to, if anyone has any questions, we'll have to address them in the panel debate. But so we'll go on real quick to Jeanette Veukel, who I think will be able to tell us more about policy. I know that you've done a lot of research on the nutrients going into these bodies of water and the Water Framework Directive. I think you've looked a lot at the complexity and the problems and what's working, what's not. So it'll be really interesting, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to give a talk on the status of nutrient input into waters in Germany. When we talk about the no, it doesn't work. Sorry. When we talk about the nutrient input into waters, our main policy is the Water Framework Directive, which is dealing with those issues. And you can see here on the map, which are showing the results of the ecological status or ecological potential of the second river basin management plan under the Water Framework Directive. And I don't want to go too much in detail, but the environmental objective is to reach a high or good ecological status, which is green or blue. And overall, you can see that only 8.1% of the whole water bodies, which are in total 10,000, reach those environmental objectives. This is not so much. And at present, we are looking forward for the results of the third river basin management plans, and we would like to assess, but I'm not very optimistic that this result will change a lot. But nevertheless, the failure is caused by too much nutrients. This is the #1 factor or #1 cause, especially for lakes and the coastal waters. We have a huge amount of hydromorphological modifications, which is relevant for the rivers, but also hazardous substances, mainly from atmospheric deposition. And overall, none of the coastal and transitional water bodies, which are overall in some 80, reach high or good ecological status or potential, which is caused by nutrient conditions. When we look to the drivers, pressures, and impact, so every water body is characterized under the Water Framework Directive, and I just don't want to explain the whole overview, but you have to see that the impact eutrophication that 79% of all water bodies are do have eutrophication, and the main driver is agriculture, of course. So 66% of all water bodies are affected by agriculture, and this is the main driver for eutrophication. We have other things like longitudinal continuity or hydromorphology, and we have also the households or stormwater overflow rainwater, which is summarized as urban development. But you can see that the amount of water bodies which are affected by those pressures are rather low. And according to eutrophication and the nutrient input into surface waters in Germany, for this we use a model which is more and for all water bodies in Germany. And here are the results of the nitrogen input in kilotons per year. And there are different sources, which is divided into agriculture. In agriculture, this is also included the groundwater inflow, so the inflow of polluted groundwater into surface waters. Then we have atmospheric deposition, households, industry, and urban areas. You can see here quite well that the amount of nitrogen input decreases, but only for the urban things like households, industry, and urban areas, but not the agricultural input of nitrogen. This is also valid and much more visible from phosphorus, what you can see here. It's the same graph with the same data, but for phosphorus. And you can see that agriculture, the input of agricultural phosphorus input is, there's no trend over the years, but you can see a very high a decreasing trend from the urban areas. And this trend is mainly caused by a revision of the urban wastewater ordinance in the 1919th. So we have a huge success to increase the water quality, but only for those sources. But for agriculture, it's still the same. I also told you that about the pollution of the groundwater in Germany, and beside the Water Framework Directive, we have a very deep view on the implementation of the Nitrates Directive. Maybe you already know that there is, at the moment, we have an infringement procedure because of a non-compliance implementation of the Nitrates Directive, so we really need to deal with it. And you can see here on the map the location of the monitoring sites, which are some 1,200 different monitoring sites, and you see the different colors. So if you see the red color, it's more than 50 milligram per liter. The concentration of nitrate is more than 50 milligram per liter. And you can see some hotspots here in the northwestern part of Germany. There we have very high livestock farming, as well as in the middle eastern part and a little bit in the southern western part. So we have really a huge problem with nitrate in groundwater, and the concentration, they also decrease over time, but overall the concentration is too high in groundwater. We also have an eye on the eutrophication in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. Here this figure shows an indicator which is from our agency. We have a bunch of indicators which are dealing with water and eutrophication in waters. And you can see here the concentrations of different monitoring sites as a 5 years average, starting in 1995 or in the North Sea and 1998 in the Baltic Sea, until 2017 or 2019. And you can see here that that there is a decreasing trend of the nitrogen concentration in the Baltic and in the North Sea as well, but the target value is not reached so far. The target value is set in the Surface Water Ordinance in Article 14, the German Surface Water Ordinance. So we have a target that the inflow in the transitional waters to the North Sea, there needs to be set a target by 2.8 milligram per liter, and for the Baltic Sea a target of 2.6 milligram per liter. I just would like to go here a view on measures. So if we talk about eutrophication in waters, we would like to catch the sources. So we would like to implement source-based measures, which means that most of the measures, 66% from diffuse sources, are related to agriculture. Based on this infringement procedure, we also need to address the fertilization ordinance, and we had a revision in 2020, which is very highly discussed at the moment, so very difficult to transfer and to discuss. And main issues of those are lower doses in red zones and stricter checks of nutrient contents or stricter implementation of buffer zones. I can also wrap up a little bit my presentation. So failure of environmental goals caused by nutrient surplus, or mainly nutrient surplus. Eutrophication is identified as one of the main impacts in German waters. Phosphorus concentration significantly decreased. There's rather no decreasing trend in nutrient input from agriculture over time. And we have high nitrate concentration in groundwater, and it is also necessary to fulfill the targets of the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. It is necessary that the rivers need to reach the good ecological status, or to reach the targets, so that we don't have too much input into the coastal zones of the seas. And these measures are mainly taken in agriculture. So, and hopefully we have time for some question looking forward, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
We have someone who raised their hand, and I think that it'd be good if they wrote their question down. And otherwise, we have a question from Jürgen. What is hydromorphology? I guess that was a new term for us.
Sorry for not explaining. Hydromorphology is the structure of a river, like a meander, or if there are gravel bars in the river, which means that there are a lot of different habitats for the fauna, especially, but also for the flora.
And this is being destroyed. It's something that's going away.
Yeah, completely, because it was the rivers were straightened, and the rivers, there were a lot of dams and barriers into the rivers, and this is the reason why they were straightened and completely build up.
I think this is something we've been hearing a lot about with reference to flooding. And so is that also, I mean, maybe this is a little bit too simple, but if the water is moving faster through, then that also means that, does it mean that the nutrients or something is getting to a place faster before it can be washed out, or like the turbulence would maybe take it out and it's going, and the organisms, and that's all just going through into the larger bodies of water?
Yeah, of course. So if you have, for example, bank fixation, there's no connection to the floodplain, and if you have also a sediment fixation or something like this, the river is more like a canal, a water canal, rather than a river, which is not an ecosystem anymore. So yeah.
And I noticed something that surprised me. I always thought that, especially for nitrogen, that atmospheric deposition was a large contributor. And so this was, you're saying that was only in the 90s, that it's actually been reduced a lot. Can you hear me? I have to. It's too quiet. I'll have to get a little bit louder. But that you in your slides you said that atmospheric disposition was not such a large contributor to the nitrogen levels for eutrophication.
No, not the atmospheric deposition. Under the Water Framework Directive, the atmospheric deposition is mainly responsible for chemical pollution in waters. So because of the fossils and because of mercury, which is from coming from the air and through rain, and it runs through into the water, but it's less important for nitrogen input.
Okay, we have an interesting situation right now. We've got participants who have question marks and raised hands. And I think in order to answer the questions, we need to have them written somewhere. So if you're still going to be here, maybe we can address it later, but I would request that the participants who have questions to either write them in Slido, or if Slido is not working, you can use our chat, and we can also read them. And I would like to thank you for your presentation. It was very, very interesting, and I learned something new. I think we all did.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm really not familiar with your topic. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Andreas Musculus. And he is going to give us a talk today about did I just lose it? The digested utilization of soil fertility, which is really important in the circular economy part of our project as well. So we're going to be looking at the aspects that you talk about and are looking forward to hearing your presentation. So the floor is yours, Andreas.
Thank you very much. Can you actually hear me and see my slides?
Yes, we can see it and hear it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Andreas Musculus is my name, and I'm from the Institute for Agri and Urban Ecological Projects at the Humboldt University of Berlin. We are not a regular part of the Humboldt University, but we are an institute associated to the university. We are dealing with food science, with animal science, with urban green, and myself, I'm concerned with crops and crop science. I have the pleasure to run this field experimental station that we took over 5 years ago, no, 10 years ago by now, from the Humboldt University. And on this place, we carry out an experiment from which I want to present something today. So I quickly introduce you into that experiment. You have to understand that soil effects are mostly long-term effects. So if you do something for 1 year, 2 or 3 years, maybe adding a specific kind of fertilizer, you may not gain enough insight in the system and on the consequences. So when it comes to soil effects, you need long-term experiments. And we set up an experiment now almost 10 years ago, where we want to find out what are the longer-term effects of biogas digesters. In this experiment, we have an unfertilized control, but also a mineral fertilizer treatment, and then a number of organic fertilizers, including cattle slurry, farmyard manure, and 5 different digesters that we source from different places. And we apply the same amount of nitrogen and the same amount of carbon every year, twice a year, and we plant maize and green rye in a crop rotation. As you can imagine, the fertilizers do not contain the same share of C and N. We need to add some mineral N where necessary in order to make it comparable. I will come back to this later, but quickly I want to also introduce you into a EU-funded project we are doing. Circular agronomics is concerned with nutrient cycling in agricultural systems, and in our place we are concerned with the conversion of digestives to mineral fertilizer on a lab scale at the moment, and also we deal with digested application technologies, and I will refer to this a bit later as well. So digested utilization and soil fertility. The first question, of course, is what can you do with the digested? What are your utilization options? And of course, we all think about fertilizer in the first hand, but there are other options. Agricultural digestives are in some places used as bedding material for animals, and you could even build up a cascade use with different material uses, and at the end an energetic use. So you could burn it or make syngas from it. And also I want to point out that one of the material uses is a substitute for wood. So there was a lot of testing done on this, and it was found out that you can actually substitute wood to some extent. But let's come back to the fertilizer use. The most common way of using digested at the moment is directly using it as a fertilizer, so putting it on top of the soil or into the soil. But I think in future, the options, the technical options which are there of converting that into a more valuable fertilizer, that will gain importance. The big problem is the big water content in the digested, which makes it very expensive to transport. And we have the situation in Germany that in some areas there are just too many nutrients, and the farmers that pay money to everyone who buys the nutrients and the slurry and the digested. And the current price for this is up to 15 euros per cubic meter. So in some areas, there's such a surplus of nutrients, especially of digested and of slurry, that you just want to get rid of it. But look at soil fertility. What is soil fertility? It's quite an old term, and a term that's not precisely described. But in general, it's the ability to generate a high plant yield in a high quality. So it's quite an agricultural term. If you think about how could digested influence soil fertility, influence the yield and the quality of plants, you could divide that into chemical effects, into biological effects, and physical effects. Chemical effects are the most obvious. So, for instance, the presence of nutrients or the absence of toxins. But then there are more not so obvious aspects like soil biology and also soil physical effects, which might be, for instance, the soil aggregate stability and the ability of water to infiltrate in the soil, or even the ability to hold water, to hold nutrients. Soil, you have to imagine, is not just a pile of sand. It's like a building, and that is built up by biology, so by organisms, by living organisms, and they build like small rooms in the soil, and that's what's influencing the characteristics of the soil when it comes to soil fertility. So a higher yield may be due to a better distribution of water and of air and all that in the soil. Let's have a bit more detailed view on the first thing, on the chemical characteristics of soil and what digestids can do on that. If you simplify plant nutrition and assume that plants only take up 3 nutrients, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, you have a certain ratio of these 3 for each crop. And you see in these graphs that these ratios are different. And some crops like beans and peas, the legumes, do not need nitrogen at all. And for a good fertilizing effect, and you could say good soil fertility, it would be good to select the digested that actually fits to the nutrient requirements. Otherwise, you end up with either a lack of nutrients in some way, and you have to add mineral fertilizer, or a big surplus of phosphorus or of nitrogen. That already is the case if you have grass as an input material for in the biogas plant, and your digested is mainly grass-based, but your crop is maize. Then if you do this for a longer time, you have a nutrient gap or a nutrient surplus. To make it even more complicated, it's not just the amount of nutrient that matters, but also the chemical form. Especially for nitrogen, you have about half of the nitrogen in digestids usually in an organic form. That means it's fixed to carbon. And that needs to be turned into a mineral form first before plants can take it up. The technology and also the timing of the application influences that strongly. In that graph, you see an experiment from last year here on the field station, and you see that when we fertilize maize with biogas digested, and we apply the same amount 4 weeks before seeding and put it under the seeds in about 10 centimeters depth, then we reach higher yields. And that's partly due to the fact that this carbon is decomposed and the nutrients are set free to be available to the plants. Let's look at the second aspect, so soil biology. How does that influence the soil fertility, and how digestids do influence soil biology? The most obvious, the most easy thing is just to look at earthworms. Here an experiment done by a colleague a couple of years ago, where we were applying digestids in different rates. So from N0 there was no digested up to a high amount, and then after 24 hours we were just counting the earthworms, or searching the soil for the earthworms, and it was clearly obvious that they avoid the digested. So they better prefer to be where there was no digested. Of course here the timing is very important, and it's crucial. And in a further experiment we did a so-called avoidance response test. This is when you give the earthworms the option to choose between 2 different soils. We either had an untreated soil and then a soil that was where biogas digested was added. And at the first end, so in the first 24 hours, they were avoiding the digested, but after some time, they liked it even more. And the reason is obviously that there are some short-term effects that may be harmful to the earthworms. But on the longer term, they can eat that. They have feed from it, and they benefit from the biogas digested. And of course, soil biology is not just earthworms. There are other parameters you can look at. For instance, soil respiration. So this is some parameter of how much the soil is breathing.
We only have 1 minute left. Just to let you know. Only 1 minute.
Only 1 minute. Okay,
yes.
I need to hurry up. Okay, so you clearly see that the soil respiration is not decreased by the digested, so obviously the digested are not harmful to the soil biology in general. The carbon content in the soil is built up by the digesteds in difference to the mineral fertilizer, and you have to imagine it's all the same amount of nitrogen and all the same amount of carbon that was added here. And after 5 years, we see some effects. And the colleague also found out that the water aggregate, the water stable aggregates, so the small rooms in the soil, you could say, they are increased when digested is applied. But how does that connect to the yields? So when you apply digesteds for 9 years with the same amount of nitrogen and compare that to mineral fertilizer, and if you look at an average of the last 9 years, the situation is such that the mineral fertilizer is still one of the best. But there are some treatments like digested pig slurry and digested crops that after some time may even give a bigger yield than the mineral fertilizer or other digested treatments. So to conclude, the biogas digesteds, they have an effect on soil chemistry, on soil biology and physics. And if they are applied correctly, they can raise the soil fertility, and they also can improve soil, the crop yields. Thank you very much.